Well. Hello, everybody. I hope that everyone can see me and hear me today. We are back after a week off. We're back with Ed Video's Open Circuit. It is June 4th in the year 2020, and what a year it's been so far. And this is episode 28. We started the show about 2 months ago, and we are live here from our super secret location at Ed Video Media Arts Center at 404 York Road in Guelph, Ontario, Canada. And every Tuesday and Thursday at 2 p.m. we are live, and normally my daughter Edie is sitting here beside me. She's off today working on some stop motion animations actually at home, so that's fine. But Norm, what we do is we talk to artists and we talk to interesting people about what they do and what they're thinking about and what motivates them and sort of how they're doing during this very unprecedented and interesting time that we're living in 2020. Today I have a great guest. Since I started the show, I knew this is somebody I really wanted to invite to speak about her work and what she does. I'll talk a little bit more about her when I introduce her in a second. Her name is Vanessa B. Rieger, and she's waiting for us in the wings on the video phone. But as we do, before we do that, I just wanted to talk about somebody who's coming up as a guest, and that would be Don Matheson, Guelph-based artist. Don Matheson will be our guest this Tuesday at 2 p.m. And I'm going to speak to her about all sorts of things that she's done in this community in Guelph. But really a lot about, she's involved with a lot of projects that involve other people. And her latest one is premiering, I think, right now or very soon, and we're going to focus on it. It's called Dreaming at Land's End. It's a series of videos that she made while she was in Gaspé, I think, last summer, and they're coming out through the University of Guelph. I think now. I don't know exactly when, but before the show on Tuesday. So join us then, and we'll talk to Don Matheson, wonderful person to have here to speak to on Open Circuit. But today, very excited to really get into it with our guest, Vanessa B. Rieger, who is a person that she's a friend of mine, but it's funny because I always knew of her for a long time before I ever met her, and so I was intrigued. She always seemed to be involved in great things, and it's only in the last 3, maybe 4 years I've met her, and I've worked with her a few times on projects here in Guelph, in particular with Kazoo Fest. We'll take a look at some examples of that. But Vanessa's one of those guests, like so many others, who's really hard to pigeonhole because she does a lot of cool things. Primarily, I suppose she's an artist, but many other hats that she wears. And we'll talk about some of these things. She's curated events. She's a technician. She's a fabricator, a woodworker, and also she does something that not too many people in Canada do. That's really close to my range of interest. She's a live AV artist. Really going to get into some of those topics with her. So let's see now if we can find her on the magic video phone. Let's see. Ooh, there she is. Hello, Vanessa. How are you? Can you hear me and see me?
I can hear you and see you. Hi, Scott. Thanks for
Hey.
having me.
Oh, thanks so much. I'm glad it can work.
Me too.
Yeah. And thanks so much for working with me to figure out what I think is the best response to what we were planning our show just this 2 days ago, and we decided the night before, I think very, very wisely, to delay it until today for Blackout Tuesday. For as as we talked about, like, that was a very easy thing for us to do, to show even a small amount of support and solidarity for what's going on in the world right now. So yeah, thanks so much for
Yeah.
that. Um,
Oh, of course. I mean, in response to that, it's I kind of saw it as a moment of silence to for people to educate themselves and take that time to really research on what's happening right now within the Black Lives Matter movement. And talking about anything else on that day would have felt wrong. So, yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. I completely agree. We'll talk a little bit about that and like the state of the world. But before we get going, I just want to ask you, like, where are you, and sort of what have you been doing in the recent times, I suppose, before we get into things.
Yeah, right on. So I moved from Toronto last year to Prince Edward County, which is about 3 hours east of Toronto. And I've been kind of living in a different lifestyle than I'm used to. I'm in a farm country. I've been living out of my trailer during the summer and finding myself at different kind of spots around PEC and doing house sitting for people as I'm kind of trying to find a place that I could potentially rent. I'm kind of scared about committing onto a lease right now. I just have my studio, and for me, that's my main priority. My personal apartment can kind of come later. So right now, I've never lived in the country before as a city person, so I'm getting used to a new type of lifestyle and meeting other people who are also finding different alternative ways of living that aren't necessarily in the city. So, yeah, that's kind of where I'm at right now. I had to run over to a different property because my internet cut out this morning. So I'm actually near my studio right now, up at the Heights near Picton.
Okay, okay, and well, I mean, I want to kind of talk about that dynamic of what that means to you to leave Toronto, because I mean you're born and grew up there, and I remember when I moved to Toronto and I was about 19, like I started meeting people at OCAD where we both went to school, as before you, and meeting people from Toronto, and I almost couldn't believe that they grew up there. Like it didn't occur to me that like kids could grow up in this place. It was just for like young people and like sort of middle-aged people. But so I can
Oh,
imagine
yeah.
it's for you. It might be a bigger change than for many.
I'm always weirded out when I meet other people who are also born and raised in Toronto. Because collectively, it's that sense of, what are you still doing here? I don't know. What are you still doing here? Because most people, I feel like a lot of my friends have long since moved, at least the people that I grew up with. So yeah, the Toronto that I grew up in isn't the Toronto today. I mean, there's the core, like the people in the city make the city great. The city itself has been changing its priorities, and those are priorities that I don't agree with. So, I was condo evicted out of my dream apartment essentially, and I just knew at that point I wasn't going to find something like that again. It was part of the old Toronto, and the new Toronto is like cubicles, it's compact, it's putting everyone in tiny boxes, and personally for the work that I do, it just wouldn't work. Like I had to give up my wood shop years ago just to stay in Toronto. And now that I'm back out here and I have a wood shop and a studio space, like in one, it's like, how did I go for so long without this? It feels so good. So it was an easy move for me in that sense where I kind of put my practice as my main priority. And I knew that what I do doesn't really fit into Toronto anymore.
Well, I lived there for about 12, 13 years, and I flew the coop, a lot earlier than you, and it's heartbreaking, I suppose, because I love that city so much. I loved going to school there, being part of that
Mm-hmm.
community, and every time I go back, it's like it's radically different. I mean, I kind of joke it's like the Eaton Center like expanded. Across all of downtown, but just didn't build the
Queens
roof
West
in.
is an outdoor mall now.
Yeah,
Let's be
absolutely.
real.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, it's just sad. I mean, in the 1970s, Toronto's like official slogan was like Toronto, the city that works. And you can take that two ways. And I kind of wonder if the more the one meaning of it kind of eclipsed, and it kind of pushed out a lot of the things that made it a wonderful, huge city, which
Yeah,
it
I
is. But
always I had this analogy that I would talk about my love-hate relationship with Toronto because it's the city I'm born and raised in, but I also it makes me angry sometimes, but at the same time, when you're in something for too long, you kind of forget about the good things. Sometimes you could just solely focus on the negative things. And when you leave a city like Toronto, you're like, wow, yeah, there's so many things that are amazing about that city.
mhm.
And I always will love it. It's always my home. But it does feel like staying in a toxic relationship where the both parties know it's not working, but it's familiar. So you stay. That's kind of my analogy. It's just like, yeah, it's just a relationship that's gone for too long, and now it's time to move on and have other experiences, you know?
Well, I mean, how are those experiences for you? I mean, I think like, what are you figuring out? Like suddenly being out in the country, having space, like probably spending a lot less money. Living a very
Mm-hmm.
very opposite life to what you've
It
always
is.
experienced. Like how's that going for you? Like emotionally, psychologically, like productively.
Wow. A
Big
lot.
question.
That's a lot.
Big
That's
questions.
a
I know.
huge question.
Yeah.
Okay. Emotionally, it feels good. Um, I'm kind of in my romance phase right now of like the new relationship where it feels good. I feel healthy. Things are slower out in the country, so there's more time to digest things. Um, I don't get as distracted as I do in the city. I have ADD personally, so the city is very like constantly. So it's nice to slow down and focus. So for those things, it's great. The city slicker in me is having some adjustments. I'm not used to not being anonymous. Like you can walk down the street in Toronto and no one will notice, no one will look at you. But here you walk down the street, everyone's looking at you being like, why aren't they driving? You know? So it's definitely like an adjustment where I'm like, wow, like I'm a one person parade walking down the street here because there's not really like a walking, not a place you walk, or even there's a lot of cyclists, but even then it's not a lot of cyclists. So, another thing that's great about Toronto is that you can bike the whole city practically. But out here, it's very car dependent. So I'm learning as a city person how to adjust my life now that I own a vehicle. And so that's interesting. And I mean, there's something about waking up in my trailer and hearing the birds chirping and the sun coming in. And there's that sense of calm first thing in the morning, which is really nice because before it was like sirens and construction and like jackhammers constantly. So that's been great.
And I mean, do you think this new environment and your new setup with everything, is it inspiring you, for lack of a better word, or changing maybe your ideas of what kind of things you want to produce or what you have the ability to make, or is that
Yeah.
changing your practice at all? Do you think, Vanessa?
Oh, well, just having a wood shop again. It's like getting on that old bike that you forgot about, but then once you're on it, you remember how amazing it is. So I have a wood shop again. It's something that I had to kind of give up a while ago in Toronto because, rent got higher, studio spaces got smaller, and even in like a collective art studio space, like I can't pull out a saw and start cutting wood while someone over here is painting or someone over here is doing electronics. It's like, but then trying to find a wood shop, and that's a separate rent. And then you have a separate rent for your art studio, and then you have a separate rent for your apartment. So it's just the cost of living just got way too high. So being able to have a wood shop again has reminded me like how much I love building things. And now it's like, oh my God, I can do so much. Where do I start? Like I'm having that problem where I'm like too overwhelmed with potentials, so it
Well,
is great. I love it.
I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad that you're finding some like a new new breath of life and creativity and whatnot in your new environment because yeah, it's shocking a little bit to leave your, not just like where you live but your community as
Oh
well. Like
yeah.
that's really really tricky and try to
Well, that's been the hardest part
yeah.
actually. The hardest part is that I'm a very social person and I'm been living kind of more isolated than I've ever been in my entire life. And then when quarantine hit, it was almost like my lifestyle didn't really change much because I was already house sitting, a house in the middle of nowhere, no one around me. Like I went for weeks without seeing a single person. And you start to get in your head a little bit too much. Like I realized how much I enjoy bouncing things off of people, working in a communal environment, which I'm used to. It's like I'm working on a project. I can ask my studio mate or my peers, like, hey, what do you think about this? Because I've been staring at this thing for way too long. What does this look like to you? And getting that feedback is so great. So not having that kind of sucks. And then not having like reliable internet connection. It's also like people are like, just start streaming. And it's like, great, but I don't have internet at my studio. Like,
I can imagine that's
so
a tricky one to deal with because if you feel like, I mean, I think the whole idea of being in a rural area has changed so much because of the internet. Because you're
yeah,
not
you
one.
can be here, but still feel somewhat connected to people.
Yeah, totally. And now too, besides like being connected to your friends, like with everything going on in the world, it's like a vital service to understand, kind of like these minute to minute changes, to be aware of things like, in the last week, for example, in the last 3 months, for example, like when, 3 months ago, one of my first reactions to when the pandemic hit is like made sure my wife and I we upgraded our internet. That was like a vital thing. Like let's get the fastest one that Tech Savvy offers now instead of the slowest one.
Mm-hmm.
Because it sort of is like there's water coming to your home and there's internet coming to your home. They're very important. It feels like at least for me. So I feel bad for you if you don't have reliable internet, but
Don't feel too bad for me. Honestly, it's a blessing in disguise because, like I was saying earlier, like, being an adult and knowing you have ADD, you get distracted. Things like the social media and cell phones, uh, I can lose myself really easily, like I do even in my own work. Like when I get working on something, I have a tendency to like really almost overly focus into it, which other things can kind of drown out. And then that can also be unhealthy if it's something like YouTube or Facebook or Instagram feeds and you're just scrolling, scrolling, scrolling. Like you can lose yourself a little bit. So it's been nice to kind of like have that reason. It's like that I'm not as online as I used to be. But it's really helped my like mental health,
yeah, I can
my anxiety
imagine that.
levels.
Yes, I can completely believe that is the case.
But let me tell you, it is a new feeling of being offline all day, coming home and turning on your phone and watching videos of like a guy getting murdered by the police. Like it's so jarring because you've been out of the loop, and then when you finally go back in, there's so much more, and it can be traumatizing too. It's like too much all at once kind of feeling, but yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. But I mean, at the same time, maybe what you're doing just by chance is like a very, very healthy thing that others, like myself, wish they had the self control, like to take it in a dose each day instead of as this constant theme of the day that's like interfering with, the
Yeah.
other in real life activities they should accomplish as well. But I mean, you're a media artist, so I mean, you're a digital person, and it's important, I think, in some ways to have it and to fully understand it. Can we talk about a little bit about that? As your ideas about video, like how did you get into? You do a lot of things, but how did you get into like video itself? Where kind of pushed you that way?
Video's funny because it's like you called me a digital person, which I think is hilarious because I would never describe myself as that. It's all relatively new to me. Like when I went to OCAD, I was in drawing and painting. I wasn't in integrated media. But the way that I got started with video, which is kind of weird, is my love for cassettes. So both like audio cassettes and video cassettes and VHS. So I've always been an avid collector of tapes. And as a kid, I, you know, had my cassette player. I was making mixes off the radio, doing like fake radio shows, and then started doing like mixed VHS tapes where I would record music videos off of like Much Music and like do like really basic editing on just like two VCRs, you know. And then I just kind of, my collection kind of kept growing and growing and growing to a point where it was an area of contention between me and my mom specifically when I was living at home. She's like, you have way too many tapes. You need to get rid of all these tapes. I was like, no, I can't. I just love the format. I don't know why I was so drawn to it. It was just a fun medium to play with as a kid. And then as I got older and, you know, everything started moving towards CDs and digital, people were throwing out their collections. So then I got even more stuff until the point where now I met other VHS collectors and analog enthusiasts, and we all have like different communities online, and we talk about like old hardware, like technology that other people consider garbage is like our finds, you know. Look at this cool CRT monitor I found someone was throwing out, like love that stuff. So it kind of, my interest in video kind of started more with VHS and analog stuff. And then I met a bunch of people shortly after OCAD, and we started the collective Analog Preservation Network. Or rather, I was like invited to join that collective. And it was a bunch of other people who had the same passions as I, you know, taking materials headed for the dump and reworking them and saying, you know, there's more work we can do with this medium. It's not obsolete yet, you know. And we kind of started this archive because there's this feeling of we're losing so much information that are on tapes, just because people don't want to digitize it, or it's like they inherit it from someone and they throw it out, or it's whatever. So it's, my whole love of video started from that. And then it turned into, okay, what can I do with all my VHS? Like I had this huge collection at my fingertips. So that's how how I broke into doing VJ work, was literally just doing something with this huge archive that I had. And that was like working with VHS and doing clips and then taking it into the live like concert festival art arena. And then it kind of just fused two interests that I had, which was VHS and art. So.
It's actually so funny, and this is why I love doing this show, is to hear these stories from people that I've, you know, kind of never had time to sit down and like really get into the details. Our trajectory is extremely similar. I started at OCAD like maybe 8 or 10 years before you in drawing and painting, switched into video right at the cusp of when things are changing from analog to digital. And I'm very glad, though, I was there to have that experience with analog equipment, because it very much informed like this overall way of thinking about video that I don't think I'd have if I just jumped right into to digital video. And I also have a very similar ideas about analog equipment or older equipment, because I don't really believe anything's obsolete if it still serves a purpose, you know. And really, like a lot of people buy into strongly like this idea. I call it like the Best Buy sales guy philosophy. Like that's from 6 months ago. You'll never be happy with that. It's garbage. Like this one has like a different color body or something, you know, like you have to get this one now. And I still kind of dabble with it, love it. I have a box of VHS tapes right there. That's from my earliest tries at live video mixing in the late 90s. And I still haul them out sometimes and bash through them and whatnot. But then you kind of, from the Analog Preservation Network you're a part of, till about 2017, then kind of this new thing came up for you, your Videomancy VJ Collective with Brandon Dahmer. Tell us about how like maybe you made that leap into, you know, focusing more on like experiential video, live video, installations for events, that sort of thing. How did that kind of get going?
Well, Brandon Dahmer was a studio mate of mine, and we met years ago randomly in Calgary at this art show that I was taken to, quite happenstance. And then, like a year later, he joined the White House, and I was like, I've met you before. And he was like, oh, you wouldn't know me. I just moved here. I'm from Calgary. And I was like, oh, you were at that art show in that random alleyway with the gallery. So we kind of like immediately hit it off. And then at the time I was with Analog Preservation Network doing that work. And Brandon would talk to me. We love horror and sci-fi movies. So we really bonded over watching movies and talking about special effects. And then the Analog Preservation Network kind of like came to a head, and then I realized that wasn't really continuing anymore. So Brandon and I decided, well, hey, like let's start our own video collective, but specifically geared towards kind of taking art and special effects techniques and combining it and trying to make installations that were really like immersive, things that you can walk into and feel like you're part of it. And Brandon has a lot of skills in programming and electronics, like soldering and stuff. And I'm more of like the carpenter builder side of it. And then we both have our interests in video. So we kind of have our own areas that we're good at, but then we come together when we talk about the ideas or themes and inspiration. And that's kind of how it got started. Was I think it was at the White House we started having movie nights, and it just kind of happened.
Well, we're just looking at some slides right now from Videomancy's performance installation. It's hard to define a word for it at the Kazoo Spooktacular, I guess about almost 2 years ago. The AMF. That was amazing, and I was laughing when I looked at the photos. I was like, wow, I remember when you told me what you wanted to do, I was like, sure, okay, that, I thought, I'm thinking like, oh, you're going to bring in, just do some mixing or whatever, and you're basically like, no, we're like gonna have an alien autopsy, and we were just watching some photos of that. Tell us a little bit about that experience, because it was amazing.
Well, first of all, I have to thank you, because performing an alien autopsy has been on my personal bucket list and Brandon Dahmer's personal bucket list for a very, very long time. We're both huge fans of the X-Files. We grew up on that stuff. So when there was that call and you guys invited us to do something, I really wanted to embrace the Halloween spirit of that event and do something extra. So we built that fake alien and stuffed it full of organs. Brandon ordered an endoscope off of the internet, and then we hooked that up onto our computers using Resolume and projected a live feed of the autopsy. So it was like, and like it was a nice progression. I'm actually really happy with how that performance went, because the first band went on, and we started the first incision, and then the second band would go on, and we'd start taking out the organs and passing them around to audience members, and that was so much fun. People were really excited to get tactile and to touch this organ, ooh. And then the final band went on, and that's when we did the big reveal of the alien baby inside of the big alien. And then we dissected the baby alien, and we stuffed it full of candy. So then once the alien baby was dissected, we passed it around the audience, and everyone ate candy. And it was just really, it was gory, but not bloody. It was like fake alien green goo gore, weird eggs, and so it was gross, but it wasn't too gross that people couldn't laugh and have fun with it. And projecting the insides of an alien as visuals for a concert, it worked really well. I had the best time.
It
Thank
what
you again. That was
Oh,
great.
my pleasure. Thank you for throwing down so hard. That was an incredible night, actually. With we saw a little bit of Bonnie Trash playing, and Corpus, and the Cucumbers from Hamilton, one of my favorite
Yeah.
Canadian bands, and just how you altered the atmosphere in what, if people not from Guelph don't know, the ANAF is sort of a funny like drop ceiling legion with no hats
Region Hall.
allowed, and I there's no atmosphere in there essentially, and so you
No.
really transformed it completely. Let's talk about that though. When you are working with musicians, doing, sort of augmenting their live performance with your visuals, it's a just like that's something I'm really obsessed with, is like how that sort of works, and like how to approach that, how to honor the music, how to like you know add, add your component to make it really soar as an experience. And we'll take a look from your website at some photos, because you worked with some incredible bands. Like how are you thinking about that, like leading up to a gig, and while you're in the moment, like making decisions like a visual musician, I suppose.
Kind of like I do see it as like a collaboration, as if I were in the band with them, responding like, in a jam session, right? And that's the funnest part for me doing live visuals, is that sense of uncertainty where things can sync up better than I could have ever planned. So there's a certain amount of letting go that you have to do. Like, it would be interesting to do more like choreography based, like stage cues and stuff. But for the most part, when musicians are playing, you kind of never know what they're going to do. They could give you a set list, but they could change it up last minute too. So it's always fun to bounce off of what the musicians are doing on stage. And then also part of what I do when I do visuals is I really immerse myself into that band's music. Sometimes the bands will even give me, so nice of them, they'll even give me like a download code to their albums, and I can sit and while I'm working on the visuals, listen to their music and just feeling like what fits, what themes are they working with, like what is the mood for this song, and what are some of the images they're working with in their lyrics and stuff. So I always do see it as a collaboration, and I'm very sensitive to when AV or like lighting can overshadow music and live performances. Like, I don't ever want to steal like my visuals shouldn't be about my visuals. It should be about the performance, and my visuals should enhance the performance, not detract from it or distract from it. So I do like to have conversations with the musicians, ask them for their writers in terms of if they have like lighting cues and stuff like that. And in some rare cases, I'm able to work with them with their visuals. I once did the record release show for Hooded Fang at the Horseshoe, and an illustrator, Michael DeForge, did the artwork. Or was it, I think it was, where is it, Kyle? I Oh, see, I get mixed up now because there's just been so many shows. But I was able to work with their like album artwork to then utilize that in the visuals. And I really like being able to do that. Like at Venus Fest, Lita Pimenta gave me a bunch of her illustrations so that I could remix them in the visuals behind her. Because a lot of musicians are also artists as well, or they hire other artists to work on their, album concepts and stuff like that. So it's really fun for me to do more of a collaboration rather than just roll up and, put a bunch of strobes on the stage or something.
Right. Could you tell me briefly, and it's a little geeky, but can you tell me about your basic setup for live visuals? We're a media arts center. We can geek out a tiny bit, and I'm always just curious about people's technical approach to their workflow, to the schematic they're building from equipment. Can
Oh
just briefly
God.
tell me a bit about your secrets that way.
I mean, my days of rolling up to a show with two VHS players is over. But I used to do that. I actually did a show one time where I think I had more gear than the bands. And that's when I knew. I was like, I am definitely not getting paid enough for this. but also that my system wasn't mobile. It works well in the studio. If I'm sitting there and I have a bunch of decks and stuff like that, like that's cool. I like the idea of throwing tapes in and out like it's vinyl records, you know. But it's in terms of taking that to the concert halls and stuff, it's not really viable. So I learned how to use Resolume, which is a projection mapping software, mainly to figure out how to digitize my work to bring it into my computer if I'm solely working with analog and VHS. So it was kind of like trial and error, trying to, you know, how any AV situations, like some things just don't work or some things aren't compatible. And then you have to try to find different products that can help you make signals compatible. I think I actually have the component here. So I have this little guy. It's like, I put stickers on it,
Mm-hmm.
but it's like a RCA S video to a USB,
Yes.
and I bring things into my computer. So I can either set up my analog thing into that feed and live mix and then record off my computer. And I do a lot of pre-recording of my visuals and then edit those down into clips that I then bring into the VJ software. So it's kind of limited my ability live in terms of affecting things with analog. Those things are kind of pre-recorded, but then on top of that, I'm able to then use like digital filters on top of the analog signals. So that's kind of how I made it a little bit more mobile.
Right, right. I mean, it's a very interesting thing you said, and very wise too about how to think about when you're doing visuals to not like overpower the situation, to not dominate, to do something that's suiting. But I also wonder, if that's if somebody's only ever done live video mixing, they may not have an intuition for it because you've done so many other types of visual art and events and curating events. So I'm always very curious to talk to people who are curators or event organizers, to understand how they're approaching things, how they're thinking about things as like a big picture of an experience involving so many people, and trying to get like the tone right and the logistics right and everything right about it. Can we talk a little bit about Ghost Hole? I have to admit, I never went to one, but it was always a thing I'd hear about each year. And almost every artist I've ever worked with has also worked with Ghost Hole as well. Tell us
Yep,
about that
amazing.
series that you organized, and how it came to be and how you're approaching Ghost Hole.
Ghost Hole. It feels like forever ago, but it really wasn't that long ago, but feels like a different time to me now. But Ghost Hole started as an extension of my absolute love for Halloween. At the time, I was at the White House Studio Project, and it was at the first house that we occupied as our studio, and it was on Lansdowne near College. And at that time, that project was still like in its baby stage, and we were trying to figure out, should we have a board or not? Like, how are we going to do this? And Halloween was coming up, and I just kind of shot it at one of the meetings. I was like, "Hey, can I throw a Halloween art show?" And everyone was like, "Yeah, sure." So that's kind of how it started, and it just kind of evolved from there. The amount of interest, support, and enthusiasm that people showed me, people wanted to get involved from day one. So I've always had a great crew of people, different arts organizations doing collaborations with them to make Ghost Hole every year a little bit different and a little bit like more epic each time. And so it was always trying to kind of like outdo the previous year. But the first year was really magical and special because we had that whole house down that alleyway. And it was just absolute chaos, but magic. Like each room had a different art installation in it. Everyone could just basically walk anywhere they wanted. So it was kind of like my way of taking haunted houses and art and fusing them together. And I was just personally, I was also at a stage in my life where I was having some health issues. So I wasn't being social. I wasn't going out. I wasn't drinking. I was really sober. And I just wanted to have an event that someone who was sober would have fun at Halloween. Because I feel like there's a lot of, like, in all events, really, there's such a heavy importance put on alcohol and consumption of alcohol. And I wanted to have a Halloween party that just wasn't your usual, oh, it's a Halloween party, everyone's in costumes and whatever, there's some spooky decorations. I wanted it to be like an artist's response to the darkness. So, like, how do we talk about death? How do we make art and not pigeonhole it into just something like, oh, spooky? I think there's a lot of art that is dark and it is challenging, and it's also valid. And it's a perfect time of year to showcase those types of works, because it's a time of reflection, and it's in the fall time, and Halloween rolls around and there's that autumn smell in the air, and people just, it's more palatable at that time of year. So I was just like really interested in creating this type of haunted art show, and it just happened to last 7 years. Wouldn't have thought.
Yeah, that's quite a run. I mean, especially for something like sort of like, so grassroots, organic, like just built through like human momentum of people want to see something happen. Can you tell us maybe a bit of like one or two of like the best memories, the highlights of Ghost Hole for you, and also maybe about some of like one or two of like the biggest difficulties of doing it, I suppose, as well. Tell us the highs
Right.
and lows of it.
Oh my God. Highs and lows. I mean, I think Ghost Hole on Toronto Island in part of Artscape was probably the peak Ghost Hole. Uh, the first and second year that I did it on Toronto Island, we also had a residency aspect of the event, which I hadn't done previously and hadn't done after that. So it was really nice to work in a space for 2 weeks leading up to the event. And it gave artists the ability to afford a studio at Artscape for a little while, because they gave us a little bit of a discount in partnership. And then being able to really immerse themselves in their work and transform that space, which already has so much history, being in the old like Toronto Island School, and then there's the haunted lighthouse like right across the street. It was amazing. And then there was got this a guy who owns a boat to do a little ghost ship. So people could either bike onto the island via the ferry, or they could take uh, the ghost ship to from the ferry dock to the Artscape dock. And that we had people doing performances on the walk into the building. So that was really amazing. And there was just, I think the whole purpose of Ghost Hole was to activate spaces that people kind of forget about the history. It was like to activate places that maybe people wouldn't think to. Like, I never wanted to have Ghost Hole in a gallery. I've never wanted to have it in a club or in a bar, specifically because it was I was inspired by a lot of events in Toronto. Like, I grew up going to raves and extermination nights and stuff like that, where it was about taking these kind of derelict spaces, uh, and for one night activating it. And there's that transformative, like, people could see something every day, but they go to the event and they're like, whoa, it looks totally different. I love that feeling of transforming a space and kind of blowing people's minds a little bit. Like, what? This is the same venue. I've been here a million times, but it looks different. It's like, yes, okay, we did it, And the Toronto Island ones, I think, were my highlights for sure.
And then you
In
start.
terms
Oops. Yeah,
of
sorry.
the
Go on about maybe some challenges
oh,
or
the
whatnot.
challenges was like, as soon as the rent started escalating, that was the biggest challenges. And that's practically, it was a grassroots like DIY event. I never had any grants, no loans or nothing, just me and my credit card. And what we made from the event went straight to the artists or the partnerships and the art organizations. We couldn't have done it without sponsors and stuff, but it was through those partnerships that it was able to go for as long as it did. But then once the rent started escalating, I just realized that the areas that I wanted to activate, the ghost holes, were becoming more and more scarce. Old buildings getting torn down, everything being turned into condos, the very small venues and interesting spaces that were left, their rents were just becoming astronomical. And then it turned to a point where, like, I'm going to charge $50 a ticket. Like, I want my event to be accessible to people. And one of the main challenges I had that I kind of didn't foresee was I only had one point of sale for the tickets, and that was at a record shop on College Street. And people got mad at me because they weren't able to buy it online via credit card. But I really wanted to give everyone an equal opportunity to get the tickets, because we can only have, like, say 500, 600 people, only 600 tickets. I don't want someone buying up 20 tickets on their credit card. I was like, but all the tickets are at this one spot, first come, first serve. And people got really mad about that. People I don't really even know. They're just mad that they don't have the convenience, that they have to go to the store and buy it. And I was like, sorry, but this is how I make it fair. This is how everyone can afford it and how everyone can have equal access to attend this event. I don't want to cater, like, a lot of my friends don't have credit cards. Like, I don't necessarily need to or want to cater to that entertainment industry where I'm charging $60 a ticket for, like, a Halloween rave. Like, those things already exist. You can go do those things. They're already there. I wanted to do something different, and I wanted to bring people out of their comfort zone. So I was like, if you have a problem buying tickets at the store, then you're probably not going to like this event.
Yeah, so I sympathize as someone who organizes events and involved with Kazoo. There's so many moving parts behind the scene that happen months in advance, and you just hope like hell that, like, it's all gonna work. But some of those ideas of, like, this ticket sales, how to navigate using passes, all that sort of stuff. That's, like, one of our biggest challenges, actually, is to figure out the best way to do that. And kind of no matter what you do, some people will be angry about it. If they have to wear a bracelet for 3 or 4 days, or and then we get angry because, like, well, okay, you don't have to do that, but then they're, like, sneaking into shows, and it's very, very difficult to figure out that sort of stuff as, like, an independent festival with, like, it's almost all volunteers. It's
well,
very
I mean,
tricky.
it was like 7 years of having a lot of people in the city coming to Ghost Hole, and it becoming, like, the one of the go-to Halloween events in the city, which I'm so blessed to have been or have been part of that. The whole experience was amazing, but it just got to a point where I didn't want to, it was never about money for me. And it was becoming too much about money. And I think the thing that kind of ruffled my feathers was I was planning to do a ghost hole at Fort York, which was going to be epic. And then the city got cold feet last minute and pulled out, only giving me 2 weeks to find an alternate venue. And everything worked out and it was fine. But it was kind of like, that's when I realized, I was like, there's just no more ghost holes anymore in the city. I've been thinking about, like, going elsewhere and activating other spaces, like where I'm out here. There's a lot of interesting buildings that are dilapidated or not being used. That would be excellent spaces to hold that event. So there's always in the back of my mind for when the time is right to resurrect Ghost Hole.
Right.
But I'm not going to force it. It turned into too much work, too much uphill, and then money. And I was like, you know what? I need a break. 7 years is a long run. I got a bunch of gray hair now.
Me too.
For sure. This is Ghost Hole right here, let me tell you. Because you're coordinating that many artists.
Oh, you're talking
and have to get insurance.
Wrong person. Come back and talk to me in 10 years.
But it's even just dealing with insurance. Like, all the what ifs. Like, what if someone gets hurt? What if this happens? So it was very stressful, worth it, but it was time to move on.
It's a common thing with these sort of, it's one person's credit card, sort of one person's name, as a lot of liability, and as you want it to do, as it grows, like, it's like a tricky thing to take that on, and so many things where you're liable financially, legally, with your reputation,
Oh
with so
yeah.
many things. But then take that step and like, okay, let's get our board, and then suddenly like you're spending all your time doing bureaucratic bullshit in the background and like making sure everyone's
Well,
happy in that
luckily, the
way.
Ghost Hole board were the most amazing people, so I didn't have to deal with that. The
Yeah.
people were the best part. Let me tell you, all the artists, all the friendships that I've made from that event. People come up and tell me that they've met their partner or their best friend at a ghost hole, and it fills me with so much joy that bringing so many people together. And even personally for me, I have so many amazing friendships now because of that event. And who knows if we would have met otherwise. So, oh yeah, some of the best times in my life, the best.
Well, unfortunately, it kind of was killed by essentially by the economy, by money, like so many things. Let's talk about
But
another.
remember, you
Yes.
can't kill something that's already dead.
That's profound, Vanessa. That is true. Oh my God.
Because I like people ask me every year, is Ghost Hole happening? Is Ghost Hole happening? And I want to say yes. I just know personally for my own health and stuff right now, I can't. But that isn't to say that it won't happen again.
Yes.
It will happen again. If I have anything to do with it, it'll
Well,
happen again when the time is right and the moons align and you know the veil is thin. It'll come back.
well, you did something else that I can quite confidently say won't happen again. Unfortunately, that's little in line with event organizing, and as the Coffin Factory funeral. Again, also something that was inspired by Toronto's economy, I suppose, and your eviction from where you lived at the Coffin Factory. Um, yeah, tell us a little bit about that. As far as like, just back it up a tiny bit, but quickly. Like you lived in this building amongst so many artists with such a long history, and then it was like this pending eviction that I think seemed to develop over a few years. And then when the final nail was in the coffin, like you took the lead and made like a sort of a celebration and a wake for it, I suppose. Like tell us about how that all came to be and what it was like.
Wow, it's another big question. So, yeah, I moved into the coffin factory from my dear friend Julia Dickens. Hi, Julia. And she had a room opening, and I moved in because I knew I loved that apartment. I had gone to that apartment a few times before. And as soon as I moved in, I knew it. I was like, this is the best apartment I'm ever going to have in my life. And people always joke that it was a very open concept loft. Everyone had their own rooms, but also we had our own studios as well. And the central area was the kitchen area, which turned to be a nice little hub for everyone. But it was also living with four other people and a bunch of cats. So there's always a little bit of chaos when you're living with a bunch of different artists and musicians. And within that building, it just felt normal and beautiful. But it also felt like old Toronto again. A lot of the people who lived in that building had lived in that building since the 80s and the 90s. A lot of my neighbors had been there for like 20 years. And when I moved in, I knew that it was a pending eviction. So it wasn't like it was shocking to be evicted. I knew it was coming. It was just really drawn out and really confusing. So I assumed I'd be evicted within 3 years of living there, and it turned into 7 years. So for me, that's always like a bonus. I'm like, wow, I had 7 beautiful years in this amazing building with amazing people. Like, cherish that forever. And I knew since moving in, like, I had the idea for a really long time to build a coffin in the coffee factory because it felt like it would bring the whole thing full circle. The building was the National Casket Factory, and it was used during war times. And it was right beside Fort York with the train and everything. Like, train tracks used to come up right to the building during the war when they would have a lot of bodies and stuff. So it just felt to build a coffin in my studio at the very end, it would just bring it all back to the start. And it just felt like something in my heart that I needed to do. I needed to do that. And then the funeral kind of happened from there. I didn't want, for the record, I didn't want to be the person to organize the funeral. I was hoping other people in the building would do something. And then as it got closer and closer to the eviction date, I could see that that wasn't happening. So I kind of was like, okay, I'll do this. And got in touch with a bunch of neighbors and put posters around the building, and then really tried to organize people to have studio openings, to have yard sales, to have like content sales, you know, to talk about what was happening and to honor the history of that building as a creative space. And once I kind of like did that, it was like everyone was waiting for someone to kind of take the lead. And I was kind of hoping it would be me, but it was me. But I knew we had to do it because I could see a lot of my neighbors really struggling in terms of financially, mentally. There was a lot of grieving. And I related to the stages of grief because that's what we went through collectively as a community, was all those stages, the disbelief, the anger, and how do you deal with that anger? And my response to most negative things in my life is to somehow figure out how to do an artwork that can communicate and express those emotions in a healthy, productive way. And I mean, originally I wanted to get angry about it and like scream on the mountaintops about it because of the housing crisis in Toronto. Like all my friends were getting evicted from different loft style buildings in Toronto, and this was my like almost third eviction due to condo and gentrification. So I had just had it, and I was really mad, and I was just like, I don't want to hold on to this anger. I don't want to hold on to the spite or the bitterness, because I saw what it was doing to people. And I didn't want that to happen. I wanted a nice cathartic experience for everyone to come together and make those connections before we all had to move. And I think the funeral spoke for itself. I could shout and scream all I want, but the act of getting a community together to walk a coffin, to celebrate a building, it felt to me that that said more than anything I could say verbally. It was just that action. And it was a beautiful day that day. I remember because it rained the day before and it rained the day after. But on the day of the funeral, it was like the sun came out. It was beautiful weather. A lot of people turned up, and it was a sad day, but it was also a celebration. And I'm happy I did it. There's no regrets there. I knew that if I didn't do it, I would regret it.
Well, nor should there be regrets. I mean, in a in a social way for your friends and the tenants living there, like with such a long history, and with most people not really knowing where to move on to, and then never obviously not being able to find something that replicates that in its space and its atmosphere and its price range at all. I mean, that was really like the last holdout around downtown. For studio space and whatnot. I mean, to help people work through that as as the purpose of a funeral is for closure and whatnot. But also, it got so much, quite a lot of great press, which is also another part of it that was so important as as awareness, advocacy for these issues. Not that there's like a simple solution to that, because it's like the crush of the economy is like sort of at the core of it, and artists should be able to influence that in some ways, but sometimes they're just kind of bowled over as a consequence of it. Is very important, I think, as a sense of closure for not just like the people in your building, but like I think it was like, to me, I sensed it as like this is the very last one ending in downtown, like that thing that Toronto built so much capital on from say the 70s to 10 years ago, it's gone. Like it's buried now. So I mean, in a metaphor kind of way, I think it was very poignant and timely for you to do that. Yeah.
Well, it was a vision that I had because as someone who's born and raised in Toronto, like I said, I feel like I've been chased by a construction crew my whole life. It's like the Midas touch, but condos. So it's like, dang, it's a condo. It's like, as artists, we play an integral role in the process of gentrification, whether we want to or not. And we are the types of people, artists go into a space and they see something else. And it could be an area that, has been ignored for a while. Like that building, used to be a derelict factory. Like it was not in good shape. And then people moved in and made it what it was. And then that's kind of, and I've seen this happen so many times where the landlords are like, well, thanks for doing all the work. Thanks for renovating the apartment. Your rent is now double. And I just knew, I was like, this has happened too many times. And with a building that has so much historical importance and cultural importance, this wasn't business as usual. This is like, no, we're going to actually stop and take time to acknowledge the role that this building has played in so many lives since the 70s. There's generations. Like in my apartment alone, me and my roommate Vince made a little chart of how many roommates we had over the 7-year time. And it was 36 people lived in my one unit. That's one unit in the whole building. 36 people in 7 years. So you do the math. A building and a creative space can touch that many people.
Yeah.
And I think I got the press because it reverberated with people. People felt the same way. And that's why people wanted to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm happy they did. I feel very blessed about that whole experience.
Well, you should, and I mean, and you should feel proud about that forever, because it was, a thing that I kind of think needed to happen for it to go out that way, instead of just like an unceremonious like last locking of the door and throwing that key out because it's no good, and like quietly like whimpering away, but I mean, let's talk about, like, I mean, this is a big theme for you, and let's try to talk a little bit about this idea of geography and contemporary art. And you've made a major change. I left Toronto, blah blah blah, and live in a regional center where Guelph is kind of resting on these laurels as a fantastic place for arts. But I mean, there's not really any real infrastructure for that. There's no very, very little like municipal funding for that. I've had more problems than good experiences with the city of Guelph and a lot of the organizations under that umbrella. Like what do you and especially in the last 3-4 months, with everything going on, sort of changing things rapidly about what's possible based on like where you are, what you have the ability to do, what you have at your means. Like what are you thinking about in this state for you, as far as like, how can the show go on? Like, how is geography less important now because if everyone's stuck in their home, or a lot of people are, like, doesn't matter where that is anymore because of the hyper importance of the internet, because of video, which you know how to do. Like, how are you thinking about geography? And I guess, like, how are you going to move forward with being in a rural area outside of this community?
Well, I feel lucky in a weird way. If you would have asked me a year ago, you're moving out to the country, like, are you sure that's a good idea? I would have said, I have no idea. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know if I'm doing the right thing. Am I doing the right thing? It feels like I am. I just went to where there was space. I went to where I found an affordable space where I could, like you said, I do a whole bunch of different things. I wanted a space where I could do all of the things that I can do in one spot to be as productive in my practice. So being able to, do carpentry, being able to work on my video, being able to even paint if I wanted to, having a space that would allow me to do all of that. I just couldn't find that in Toronto anymore. But in terms of geography and everything that's happening with COVID, like it's so huge. Every job that I have, every hat that I wear currently doesn't, like, I'm not making any money. Like, I do art tech work, I do art installation work for galleries. Though galleries are closed, I do visuals for concerts and shows and festivals. There's no concerts or festivals, and probably won't be for like a year if we're lucky. So, oh my God, it does feel like this incredible push to go online. And here we are online, where, it's great. This is awesome. But for me, I don't know how to translate, or what are people calling pivoting onto the online thing. And I was doing the opposite. I was pivoting off the offline before this happened. So now I know there's this big push to like put your work online. And like, I just finished my website. So I feel like that's been a burden for me for over 3 years of finally getting my website up. So that's like baby steps. We haven't done this before. We've never been this connected before. We're all learning how to deal. I don't know how I'm going to make money. I know right now, like, I started up an escape room with my stepdad last year. So I'm also a new business owner, which is also closed. So we're right now figuring out how to get the escape room online. So we can do virtual escape rooms, which we've already done a few, and they worked out really well. Just basically put a GoPro on your head, and people are on a Zoom chat telling you what to do in the room. So then you act as like an avatar.
Oh, that's
It's so
awesome.
it's so weird, but actually really fun. And when we did the first few test runs, we had someone from San Francisco play the game, which we wouldn't have been able, like, we had someone who was, not in great health, who otherwise couldn't leave their house, play the game. So suddenly we're doing this thing where we're trying to pivot the business to figure out how to move forward, how to take it online. But it's actually made me realize that it's made it so much more accessible to everyone by doing it. And actually, I think we've decided that when the COVID thing, if it's ever over, we're going to continue to do the virtual online escape room, because people with mobility issues, can now come and do it. So it's really opened my eyes to how amazing online stuff can be, how accessible it can be for so many people. And like, you see, like, a lot of things online are giving like free memberships for the month of the quarantines, and a bunch of books are free, or a bunch of videos are free right now. So it's a really exciting time in terms of kind of going into hermit mode and doing some reading, especially with the Black Lives Matter movement. Like right now, especially the amount of resources that are made available for people to educate themselves, to read up, and to think about, like, all these people right now are talking about defunding the police. I don't think anyone's ever had that big open conversation about that idea before. So there's a lot of like really terrible things that are happening, but then there's so much access to information and so much accessibility to this information. It's really exciting. But it is kind of a silver lining to, people like dying.
Yeah.
So it's unfortunate that it had to come to this in order. Like, I'm upset it took COVID for me to realize, like, oh, accessibility for the escape room, doing virtual stuff. Like, now I can't unsee that. Now it's like, wow, this is amazing. Like, before we had issues with wheelchair accessibility, and now we can offer that online for someone to play, via avatar GoPro thing. So for me, it's a weird situation because I'm so tactile, hands-on person. Uh, Being in a digital realm isn't my usual zone, especially now that I'm in the rural zone. But I've learned how to use OBS. I'm learning how to bring my analog into digital. Oh, should I switch over to my little?
Oh yeah. Show us
Oh wait, that's not it. Hold on.
your analog Zoom
Is
setup.
this not working?
That's
Oh,
a wonderful headshot, though.
hey, thank you. My video just stopped. Okay, there it goes. Hold on one second. Let me
Don't
figure this
worry.
out. I'm new. I'm new to
Hey.
this.
Oh, there it is. Lovely. Oh, that looks so good. So tell, what are you
Woo.
doing there? You're feeding an analog. Oh, Vanessa, that's amazing. Tell us how you're doing that. That's incredible.
It's it's just my Panasonic digital AV mixer. This is like basic analog. Now you can see there's some kinks, like my voice is out of sync, so I'm still figuring out how to bring analog into this whole new world of live streaming. It's definitely fun when you go to a Zoom party. Been doing kind of some VJing off the cuff when I go and listen to DJ friends do their live streams online. But I'm really interested in figuring out like how to play with these new mediums as they're being invented. I'm gonna go back to the other video now, just because the lag is kind of weird.
That's okay. It's just part and
But
parcel.
hey,
Yeah.
this is a new skill I've obtained just through the need of learning how do I live stream. I think one of the most fun things about being an artist is learning constantly, whether it's technology, just how to do things, like getting certified is one of my favorite things. Just getting certified for different things. The more skills I like to collect skills. I was raised as a scout brownie, so I kind of see that as like, here's another skill I can add to my list. I know how to do OBS, and I don't know if I've ever need to use analog for a live feed, but it's nice to know how to translate the medium that I like to work with into something that I could show other people.
Yeah, I respect that a lot. I mean, I think it's a big key for to find success as a creative person, as an artist, whatever, is to continually like learn, and it may not be the trajectory that I think a lot of people purport about how that works, but it's worth learning backwards. It's worth learning sideways. It's always just kind of like be pushing it and be willing to change, to be willing to be open minded about what you do and not get comfortable about things. I mean, I see that that's a way that people build a sustainable career as an artist instead of just figuring out their like shtick and running with it. Because I mean, it's a tragedy when I see a lot of people whose shtick sort of becomes obsolete or it becomes a fad and then it's gone or whatever. Like people built up careers over decades and suddenly like Pinterest or something, it's hot for a few weeks and it looks like they're obsolete. So I really
Mm-hmm.
respect that, like the variety of things that you're involved with, and you're how brave you are. I think to move out there. I mean, you have a really good and healthy and positive outlook on things, and you've been able to deal with like
I'm trying.
challenges in your life.
I'm Yeah, I'm trying. Like, art has always been kind of a therapeutic thing for me. Like I said, like if I'm having a negative feeling about something, I like to do a project that deals with those emotions in a healthy way to get them out of my system, not to hold on to it and let it kind of fester. So art for me has always been a great way to make a point about how I feel without necessarily like going online and bantering about it. I really like to show it. And yeah, thanks. I mean, it's one of those things where it's like, is it bravery? I don't know, because I was scared. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't nervous. And like I said, I wasn't sure if I was making the right decision. I still kind of feel weird about it, especially right now with everything that's happening and all the protests. Like, I want more than ever to be with my friends and with my family, my chosen family, and support them. And it's a very strange feeling being out here. This is my first year out here, and then all this stuff happens. The time where I really want to help my friends. So just relearning what I can do from where I am in my position.
Yeah.
And I'm in a community that isn't very multicultural.
Hmm.
You know, I'm in a community that does need to have these types of conversations, and maybe that's why I'm here, to talk to people around here about, you know, different cultures and different lives, and like respecting other people and basic human rights, you know, like um so I just know that I didn't want to live in a condo, and I would rather live in a trailer. That was my option. Condo, trailer. Trailer.
I don't blame you. The condo fees are a lot less, you know. But I mean that's amazing, and I mean I think with everything happening, like especially in the last week or so, I think that's like really the self reflection that a lot of people who are on like the right side of going to be on the right side of history are really like having a lot of difficulties trying to figure out for themselves is like what can they do like that's effective because I think there's a feeling that like people, want to run out and like fix everything in the next hour. But I mean, obviously that's not possible. So people are trying to evaluate like what tools do they have, what resources they have, what kind of voice do they have, how can they do things effectively, and like respectfully and whatnot. And I mean, I think a lot of soul searching and creative people to figure this out as you feel. I mean, as like kind of white Canadians, like kind of distant from it in a sense, from the things on the ground, sort of like separated, like powerless to be, and like within these images we're seeing online, these protests and whatnot. But I mean, I think it's. That's also like really great is that people are thinking about like how what abilities do they have, especially.
Well, we all have our own skills that we can bring to the table. Like, I don't think it can be very overwhelming and seem like such an uphill battle. You know, it's like, you know, against the police. Like, it's how do you hold the law accountable when the police are breaking the laws? So, you know, and it seems like one person alone can't do anything, and it's so overwhelming, and there's a lot of anxiety involved. But like I was saying to you earlier, if we all did one thing, like even if it's just one little thing each day, it matters. That you have to see as like the whole movement and people uniting together, all doing what they can to help in whatever way that is. And like specifically for us, like we were talking about the accessibility online, like right now there's so much information online to educate yourself, to read up about what's happening right now, to inform yourself and to do better. It's through action, not necessarily saying like, oh, I'm sorry, because I know how Canadians love to apologize all the time. And I made this post the other day: the best apology is changed behavior. So going forward, we have to educate ourselves and do better. And when you work on yourself, like everything around you can also get better. You know what I mean? So there's a certain amount of like self-care we all need to do. We all need to check in with our friends and like our friends of color and be like, hey, how can I help you? What do you need me to do right now? And I think a lot of people are scared to ask because it's like this weird way that we all feel somewhat complicit in it. This is like a systematic oppression that's been centuries in the making coming to a head right now. So it's so overwhelming. But all we can do is just like reach out and say like, hey, how can I help? What can I do? And let other people tell you instead of trying to dictate to people how they should protest and how they should help. And I feel like we just all need to be united in what we all know in our hearts is the right thing, right?
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Well, Vanessa, I think you kind of. I always ask the guests the last question, is sort of like, what do you kind of think? Although the world's going through a trauma right now, and people are dying, and it's really, really difficult to figure out like what are sort of the potential positive things that might come for people or humanity, or shifts in thinking and whatnot. You kind of answered that already 2 questions ago. I think you have some great ideas, and a good outlook in the way you're thinking about who you are, your situation, but how it plays into like your community and the world as well. So I just really want to say thank you so much for taking the time talk to me about this today. I really enjoyed talking to you and learning more. Not just about kind of the details about what you do, but sort of your approach is really what's interesting to me. And I really hope you're doing well out there. And
Thank you.
someday maybe when if it's possible, I'm cruising down the 401 on my way to Montreal or Ottawa or something. I'd love to swing by,
Oh,
see your
you
trailer.
call me anytime. Um, Bring a tent.
I've got one.
One thing I do want to say in terms of the future, this idea of drive-ins being a thing again. Because we have a drive-in out here and I love it. I go to it every year religiously. And I do like this idea of like, how can we create events that people can attend, but still have like their social distancing? So there's been a lot of talk about drive-ins lately, and I'm interested in just like new ideas, what we could do to try to like um, to rework these formats of what an event is. You know, it's like kind of thinking outside of the box. And in terms of our society too, like a lot of people are thinking about new ideas they never have thought about before. So despite all the horribleness that's happening in the world, now is an amazing time for change. And also, I'm really excited to see the artwork that comes from this time.
Yeah.
I know it's kind of like terrible in one sense, but you know, through times of great trauma, some of the most important artworks in history were developed. So I'm really interested to see what comes out of this time right now.
Yeah, me too. Me too. I mean, I think the contemporary art world was overdue for a big shakeup. To be honest, it's getting a little too comfortable, a little bit unfocused on what's important, and kind of forgetting what I suppose art has been for tens of thousands of years for people. So maybe, I mean, in some ways I'm excited. There's a few things that I think that might die off that I will not miss and not lament at all. And maybe it'll crack open some room for different approaches and different ideas and different ways of doing things. So time will tell, and it's hard to be, I think, patient for people. It's not in our nature. We want things quick, and to just hang on there, do what you can, and just wait until the answers are known, as they will reveal themselves in time, and to just respond to it the best an individual can. So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad you're doing
Mm-hmm.
that, Vanessa, and keep it up. Be in touch anytime, and
Thank you so much, Scott. It's been an honor to be here and to talk to you. And again, if you're ever out in this way, please let me know. I'd love to put you up if I can. So it would be great.
likewise, if you're back in Guelph, let me know.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, and yeah, take care, and we'll talk again sometime soon.
All right. Thank you so much
All
for
the,
having me.
all the best, Vanessa. Take care.
Bye. See you.
All right, that was great. Great chat with Vanessa B. Rieger, who is out in Prince Edward County, where she's been residing for almost the last year, keeping things going for herself, for her community, for her practice, and for people around her as well. That was the longest interview we've done in I think 28 episodes of Open Circuit. But I feel like that we were just getting warmed up. We could have went for a lot longer. I skipped a ton of questions I had prepared, just to keep it casual and to just chat with Vanessa. But there's a lot of other things I was hoping to find out about what she's up to too. Yeah, so thanks so much to our viewers for tuning in. Open Circuit's every Tuesday and Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I hope everyone's doing okay. It's pretty unprecedented time. There's a lot to think about what's going on, out in the world, but I think that also causes people to think a lot about what's going on, internally for themselves, and their own ideas, and how they play into it, and what they can do, I suppose. So I hope everyone's doing well, and trying to maintain some grip on what our new reality is, for whatever that is, and thinking good thoughts and doing good things. Join us on this Tuesday, June 9th, when we have local Guelph-based artist Dawn Matheson. Wonderful person, wonderful artist, overflowing with empathy for others and involving them in her many audio and video-based projects in the community, doing a lot of work with deaf communities, youth, senior citizens. She's a really, really wonderful person. I want to ask her a lot about that motivation and how she thinks about what she's doing with these projects, sort of, not being at the forefront a lot of the time of the concept, allowing others to take over the ideas. Take care, everybody. Thanks so much to Vanessa for joining us today, and of course, thanks so much to EdVideo's funders, Canada Council for the Arts, Ontario Arts Council, and the City of Guelph. We'll see you Tuesday. Bye-bye, everyone.